So now we're going to turn our focus on to turning costs into budget. And if you look back at your slides in Lesson 1, Module 3, around slide 4, you'll see this slide right here that I have on the screen, which talks about turning costs into budget. And it basically provides us a scenario where you're required to hire code complaint officers in order to uh, have enough to satisfy the required complaints for a given fiscal year. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take this scenario and we're going to turn this scenario into a budget request. But before I do that, I kind of wanted to cover some things that were also in this lesson that I don't think that was in your textbook explicitly, but I kind of want to talk about it. So on about slide 3 of lesson 1 of the module 3, I talk about fixed costs, variable costs, and step costs. Just to be clear, fixed costs are costs that do not change. Okay, so for example, your rent, your mortgage, your car payment, things like that. Those will be fixed costs. So costs that do not change. Variable costs, on the other hand, are costs that change as you do things or as things are consumed. For example, the amount of gas that you buy is dependent upon how far you drive. Okay, so the more miles you put on your car, the more you're going to pay for fuel. Okay, so that would be a variable cost. A fixed cost, on the other hand, is a step cost, on the other hand, is a fixed cost that increases as your service capacity increases. So, for example, if you have a teacher that has a service capacity of 10 students, when you accept that 11th student, that basically means you need to hire another teacher. So your fixed costs have gone up one step in order to satisfy the extra demand. Okay, so those are the three types of costs that we generally will deal with when we're talking about budgeting and costing. Um, Now, in your textbook, you may have run across the term other than personnel costs and personnel costs. Well, that's pretty self-explanatory, but just in case you didn't get it, personnel costs basically refers to salaries and benefits, things tied to personnel, and then other than personnel costs is everything else. Okay, all your other overhead. So now let's focus on this scenario right here. So assume that each code enforcement officer is required to investigate 126 code complaints a year, while senior officers are required to do 152 complaints a year. The agency wants to increase capacity to cover 1,800 complaints. Create a budget that would allow it to increase its service output. Okay, so the spreadsheet that I have here in front of you is basically how I did it. All right, and you see over here columns, right? I have my number of investigators. I have the number of complaints. Okay, um, also too, and I didn't put this in the scenario on the screen, but this would be in your homework if you get a question like this, which I think you will. You also have salary for a supervisor. Okay, so that's a fixed cost is already there. So the salary for that one supervisor is $75,000. Okay, so now we need to add salary for officers, for senior officers and junior officers. Okay, so we need 1,800 investigations or 1,800 in complaints handled. Uh, the number of investigators we need is contingent upon the number of complaints that we can handle. Okay, so what I did here, I set up the number of complaints, 126 complaints for junior investigators and 152 for senior investigators. I basically um, multiplied that, created a formula to tell me how many complaints I can handle. So I multiply the number of investigators by the number of complaints, and that tells me that, for example, junior investigators can handle 756 complaints. If I hire six out of 126 complaints, and senior investigators can handle 1,064 complaints out of 152 complaints. Okay, so what I did here, I just put my numbers in, and I multiplied these two numbers to get these two numbers of how many complaints that I can handle, and then I totaled it to give me my total number of complaints. And you can see here, hiring six junior investigators and hiring seven senior investigators allows me to handle 1,820 complaints. Now, what does that mean for my costs? Okay, so that basically means I need to add six junior investigator positions, seven senior positions, right? At $45,000 for a piece for a junior and $55,000 a piece for a senior. Okay, and I multiply that by six, and I get $270,000 for six junior officers and $385,000 for seven senior officers. So that these two salary dollars, based upon my position, my number of positions, including the supervisor for $75,000, gives me a total of $730,000 for my salaries. Okay. So now you notice over here I have 29% for fringe benefits. I basically multiplied this 29% times the 730, and that gave me $211,000 for fringe benefits. Okay, so therefore my total personnel cost comes to 941,700, and that includes the salaries plus my fringe benefits, which gives me my total personnel. Okay, so again, in your homework, you'll it also tell you that um, they have to have supplies and things like that, right? So how much do we have to pay to buy them supplies? Well, supplies are $8. We have 13 officers that we're hiring, okay, and they're going to work for 280 days a year, 280 work days. Okay, so we basically multiplied the 280 times the $8 times the 13 officers, and that gave me a total supply cost of 29,120. Okay, then in my scenario I also have rent, utilities, and then my supplies is here. So my total other than personnel costs comes to 75,620, right? And then my total recurring costs for this for everything is 1,017,320. And then that's my budget request. All right. So again, the amount that you request is really contingent upon the number of investigators that you decide to hire. Okay, so in this scenario, I hired six regular investigators, seven seniors, and that allowed me to handle a capacity of 1,820 investigations a year in total, which equated to 1,017,320. And look, going through this scenario several times, this was the cheapest that I can do that while still meeting my capacity. Okay, so in your homework, you'll see a scenario similar to this, and just kind of use this video as a guide to help you figure out how much you need, how many officers you need in order to handle the capacity that you need to handle.